If I had to choose one word that could describe the theme that pervades throughout Your Turn to Die, it would be ambiguity. Whether it be ambiguity of morals or ambiguity of character. While that may seem obvious and fundamental to any story featuring a death game, Your Turn to Die is able to execute this theme to better effect than any other death game story that I've come across. From how the cast of characters are presented, to the structure of each game and chapter, to the gameplay itself from the perspective of each character you're placed in. This can be seen in even the first two characters, Sarah and particularly Joe. While Sarah is a more complicated conundrum that we shall delve into as we go, Joe's arc is what sets the standard for the rest of the story and molds the player's expectations. From the start, the player is naturally inclined to trust Joe. He is introduced as Sarah's closest confidant and a friendly face in the otherwise unknown territory of the death game. But at the same time, he displays feelings of distrust towards the others, such as when he attempts to obscure his name in the initial meeting with the rest of the cast, or, more significantly, when he votes for Mishima at the first test. The very idea that he voted for Mishima is ambiguous, as well as his role in the later main game. What matters though is that the seeds of doubt are planted in the player's mind more directly when So reveals Joe's vote to Sarah. Ambiguity lies throughout the mystery of Joe's supposed lying about the vote, all the way to So's flippancy on the issue. However, the main thing obscuring Joe's machination during the main game is the true lie, the status of the sacrifice card, which is implied to Sarah as belonging to So, but unknowingly ends up in Joe's hands. The bar scene featuring Joe also affirms the player's and Sarah's conception of Joe as a protector, though evidently only for Sarah. This generates an air of uncertainty around the roles for Sarah as the player finds themselves distrusting the most obviously suspicious people, such as So and Kai, not realizing the trickery of Joe himself. The most trustworthy character of this point, as the others are still partially strangers. For Sarah, any intentions from Joe can never be hostile, as she is the one that is the benefit from any of it, in a similar relationship as So is to Kana, which also helps to deflect the player's judgment. According to the rules of the death game, if the Keymaster is voted, then everyone dies, whereas if the sacrifice is voted, everyone dies but the sacrifice, and +1. But exact rules cannot be known outright, and have to be investigated before they can be ascertained, meaning that the safest and easiest card to pinpoint is that of the Sage. The Sage is tasked with identifying the Keymaster so that they don't get voted for, yet in doing so, it is easy to expose their own card. Therefore, the safest bet in the death game is to vote for whoever the Sage is, as the commoners have no tasks to speak of. Joe intentionally masks his actions as that of the Sage, so that he will be voted for as the sacrifice, and come out victorious while choosing Sarah. The bar scenes before the game highlight his dilemma, as he is seen looking regretful after the Mishima votes, and hanging his head while looking at a card, the sacrifice card, which is quickly substituted for a photo between Sarah, Joe, and Ryoko, hinting at it to start with. Despite his intentions to essentially lead everyone into death for his own escape, he until the end comes off as a nice guy. Meanwhile, knowing what we know in later chapters, So is distrusted the most due to his demeanor, while his intentions were to protect Kana. This flip in how one must view this situation proves instrumental for influencing the player as well as the characters in question, as this first game establishes all of the simmering relations between them and you. Importantly, as it becomes with each chapter, it answers many questions while continuing to leave others unsettled, namely the mystery of the sacrifice card's placement, the papers, and the relationship between So and Kana, as well as Kai's history. This ambiguity of character is further asserted with the existence and gradual introduction of the AI-infused dolls. Firstly with the Mishima AI and then the acquaintance of the fake Riko. In both of these instances, however, they are used as a detriment and even a puzzle piece in the case of the fake Riko. In all instances, they are essentially hostages. However, the fake Riku is forced to perpetually be an obstacle, which disconnects the player somewhat from sympathy. This significantly puts emphasis on the function of the death game, which is to sink less important lives in order to survive. In pushing Riku, you effectively end what is to you a lesser life to save others. A logical decision that can later see itself manifest in Chapter 2's main game, should Sarah decide to vote for Kana. In the main game of Chapter 1 and in Now's ending as well, So highlights the philosophy these decisions emphasize, especially as it pertains to his view of Sarah due to her win rates. Sacrificing the weak for the stronger in an extreme survival situation, and this predicament ironically begins with Riku in the center of it, as she is described as someone who is rough on the strong yet kind to the weak. This contradistinction in philosophy, in contrast to the will of the hosts of the death game, makes it significant as to why Riku always meets an end in So's routes. It is interesting how the more logical choice within Chapter 2 Part 1 will save Riku, while the more emotional one does not. But the inverse is true in the next part. No view of this situation is correct all of the time, leading further into this ambiguity. Regret and guilt ferment in this uncertainty, the idea that your past decisions were a mistake of some sort. But every decision in this situation results in bloodshed. Would Sarah have been more satisfied than she is in all the other routes if Joe's trickery in the first game had succeeded, if those two had led the others to their doom for their own quick survival? This is the statement that Sarah is able to make to herself in the Kana route, as Sarah's view of Joe between each of the two routes informs her own outlook. It's this outlook that comes to influence a certain bloody path in Chapter 3 Part 1, the Doll chapter. The death of Riku or Alice at the hands of Ranmaru, influenced by Sarah's manipulation. You see, Sarah's original view of Joe was one of paranoia. Paranoia that whoever she leads towards death necessarily must loathe her, just as she would in her own case. Survival determines disposition. In So's routes, she entirely forgets about Joe, and in this darker side of her, also seems to shed this paranoia. It is also shed in the Kana routes, but in a different direction. Midori mentions that Joe was added to the game with the explicit purpose of nerfing Sarah's win rates, as according to the data, she is stronger and has a better chance of survival when she is alone and has no attachments to the other participants. In the Kana route, she resolves to escape with the group exclusively, whereas this isn't the case in the So routes, creating interesting implications and differing outcomes between the two thus far in the story. Because the most interesting ambiguity of character in the story is actually Sarah herself. She is statistically the candidate with the highest win rates, which inspired fear and hatred from So. Looking at the first main game from So's perspective, Sarah undoubtedly looks like the most suspicious character. He is fearful of Sarah's high win rate and his own 0%, just as he knows that Joe is the one holding the sacrifice card. He even comes to learn the contents of Kai's laptop, and how he is connected to Sarah and Joe, alongside Sarah's supposed importance to the death game itself. Throughout the main game, Joe is attempting to be voted as the sacrifice, and Kai is also a protector of Sarah. All of the others wholeheartedly trust Big Sis Sarah in the main game as well, Alice being a noted exception, with some later even being willing to sacrifice themselves for her. So's breakdown in the total distrust of everyone involved doesn't look unreasonable at all. In Chapter 2, he's able to find trust in Sarah and tell all, due to his relation with Kana. But in So's route and further, she more and more resembles the monster that he initially pegged her as. Even his own weak sister was killed in the crossfire. This is just one example, and so far the most important perspective towards Sarah. The opposite lies in Keiji, but analysis of him quickly falls into the theoretical. I believe because of this, however, he will be the most important character in future parts. The ambiguous distrust is broken once, in Kyutaro's action to forgive Mai after she stabs him. The Asunaru created dolls are pinned to each human and forced into yet another hostage scenario, not dissimilar from the humans. It establishes that it doesn't matter what one does and doesn't know about the other. They all have the same goal and the same enemy. This understanding is able to unify them, outside of a certain Ranmaru situation which highlights the distance Sarah's self has from this mentality, and how quickly it can spread among the others, especially when it is Sarah. Considering that the original death game was attempting to find one person among the cast that was strong and manipulative enough to win out in the end, and we may assume that this current one has a similar objective, it makes sense how someone with the leadership skills and ruthlessness hidden inside her ends up with such a high win rate. But Joe's inclusion complicated things. What Your Turn to Die is excellent at is preying upon the idea that you can never fully look into the heart of a person, and presenting to the player how it is harder to be a good person and make good decisions than it is to be a bad person. If Sarah fully succumbs to her darker side, her win rate goes up significantly, as said by Midori. It'd be easy to win the game. If Sarah had willingly joined Joe's trick and tried to sabotage the discovery of Kai's Sage card, or if Sarah chose now, or what have you, it'd all be over. Many things could be solved so easily if you could entirely eliminate the problem so quickly, but humans are a bit more complicated than that. We have attachments and sociality, and these are valued in of themselves instead of as a tool or simple obligation. The ambiguity of this dilemma is what the game is rooted in, and what drives the conflict then forward.